Okay, so James, you there?
Um, Hi, Jeremy. Thanks so much for having me today.
Okay, great to have you. Welcome everyone to our little webinar this evening. My name is Jeremy Craig. I'm with a company called Testtakers here in Singapore, and with me this evening is Mr. James Russell, and he is with New International School of Thailand, NIST, up in Bangkok, and he's probably more informed than I. Have been following things very closely as we try to get our head around what all is going on in the world of education. I think it's hard enough now just to know what's going on with normal things, but just to get into education as well is maybe even a little more complicated than anything else, because everything is so dependent. It's almost like a cascade effect of one thing happens and it just reverberates. It seems like every other day the policies change, the rules change, the expectations change, and we're going to try to bring a little bit of clarity such that we can to what's going on. And then we're going to open up some questions at the end. And at the very end, we're going to bring in a special panelist who has had a very interesting career in marketing, to talk a little bit about her education journey and journey afterwards. If you have questions along the way, I believe there is a chat window. There's a Q&A window. There we go. There's a Q&A window that we're going to try to keep an eye on. And definitely about the end, we will address that as best we can. I know that a lot of you sent in Q&As along the way with your registration for the actual webinar, and we'll address them all as we can during the webinar itself, and then we have a little log of the questions that we're going to do afterwards. Now, for those of you who were with us last time or even the time before, I got kind of lazy. I used the same deck more or less. We've just been updating it as we go with more information each time around in terms of data as it comes in. So we're just going to be doing a whirlwind around the world tour of America, Canada, UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand as education destinations, what we know as of today, with what's happening with universities, both starting and not starting, going hybrid, going virtual, who knows. And then we're going to talk a little bit about testing updates, specifically I-levels, O-levels, IGCSE, A-levels, AP, IB exams, all that fun stuff and what we know. And then really what I think a lot of you are most concerned about kind of recommendations per year, about what you should be worried about depending on where you are in the educational journey depending on where you are in the educational process. And then after that, after the quick Q&A at the end, we'll bring in the guest at the end. I hope to have us done and dusted by about 75 minutes time, by 9:15 Singapore time. I know that some of us are in Japan, some of us are in KL, some of us are in Thailand, maybe people further afield, I'm not really sure. But we like to keep these things as short and sweet as possible. So, moving along. Something I've been telling everyone who will listen to me since March, since all this got very interesting indeed, is this Chinese aphorism or saying or whatever you want to call it, 摸着石头过河, which means to walk across the river by feeling for stones. You can't plan too far ahead when you have a situation that is this dynamic and this kind of really unprecedented. This is a event this is our World War II for our generation. This will go down, and maybe not World War II big, hopefully not, but this will go down in our history as, an epochful event for all of us to live through. And hopefully we'll get through it quickly and, things will be okay for all of you and yours, but you can't plan too far ahead. We don't know what's going to happen in 2 years. We don't know if universities are going to open in August. Probably not. We don't know what's going to happen in 2023 with the SSAT. It's just too soon to say. So I think all you can really worry about is get a little selfish and worry about what you're going to do next week, what you're going to do next month, what you're going to do at the start of the school year. How can you maintain your education kind of momentum through this process, through the break that we've had since March, and how you can sort of make the most of this unprecedented, ultimately terrible information. There's a lot of information flowing around. These webinars are coming fast and furious. I think James gets more kind of newsletters than I do. I get probably 7 or 8 per day that I read through. All the colleges are pumping out information as well. Really, the best source of information is not people like me or people like James. It's the university themselves. We'll talk about this in a little while about what the best sources of information from a university are, rather than be it a third party or an aggregator or something you heard from a friend of yours who heard it on a WhatsApp group from some friend they had in Dubai or something. So there's a lot of bad info floating around. I think now it's almost too easy to share information, and that's make it hard to figure out what's good and what's bad. So you always want to kind of go straight to the horse's mouth more than anything else, okay? But in general, universities need students. They need students to keep the lights on. They need students to pay so they can pay their professors. They need students to function. They're not going to make things harder. They're going to make it easier. So even if a university right now is stating we need X, Y, and Z, that will probably change in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months as the situation evolves. So don't get too pessimistic about, oh, I want to do this test, I can't do this, etc. Simply because everything is very dynamic, the situation is fast changing, and universities are nice people. They're nonprofit, right? Most are, but they ultimately want your business and they want to help you succeed with your life's journey. Okay, James, anything else to add just on the broadest sense?
Yeah, I just, the importance of, I just popping on my screen here. Can everybody see me? Are we good, Jeremy? Good, awesome. Okay, so as Jeremy said, just be these are very fluid times. Things are quickly evolving and evolving on a daily basis. So many of you might be rising juniors, or some of you are the class of 2020, just sort of waiting for updates on when is the visa office going to open so I can go to the US. Just be calm as possible, be relaxed, and be your own best advocate for source of information. And as Jeremy mentioned, check the websites of the universities, the schools that you're interested in. I just had a chance to look at UPenn's just in the last little. It's very up to date by the date, so there's a complete history there. As well, another suggestion I have is, in addition to following the Twitter accounts by looking at the university websites directly, I strongly recommend, if there's a particular university that you're very interested in, is to subscribe to their specific newsletter, because there's great information. They run a weekly sort of overview of everything for international students. So just another suggestion to add on there. So what I'm going to talk about next, let's move on, Jeremy, to the talking about latest developments in international admissions. So we're going to look at the U.S. and Canada specifically together as a unit. Canada typically does take the lead, does follow the lead of the U.S. When it comes to what their decisions are with international students and policies. So that first point there, that this is a general point. This is specific to the U.S. and to Canada, that there is a drop in international students enrollment following, for this year typically. And, the reasons are, obviously many students have been sort of overwhelmed with, many students like yourselves have been overwhelmed with the online learning, the Zooming, and many countries such as Thailand, Singapore, Japan are ready to go, with options that are in person and more interactive. And a lot of the universities in Canada and the U.S. have chosen the route of going online. And when you think about it from a safety perspective, when you think about it for a value for money perspective, some students really thrive under that dynamicism of having that that personal interaction. And that's one of the reasons certainly is going virtual. Other reasons have to be due to the fact of recent events in the U.S. with the spike of COVID cases, whereas when we're here in Asia specifically, we're on a flat line. So from a safety perspective, it's more appealing to stay here and then sort of follow this wait and see approach. Jeremy, would you like to add anything to that? Like in Singapore, is there anything like?
Well, one thing in Singapore, clearly Singapore has, arguably world-class universities here, and the universities have kind of opened their doors a bit to say, hey, if you don't want to go to the UK or Australia or the US, they open up another exercise of admissions to get into the big state-run universities, hoping to kind of maybe keep some of those great students in town. One thing to consider that wasn't really reported in the newspapers here, though, was that, again, if you say you're accepted at LSE or UCLA, and you do 1 year at a university in Singapore or Thailand, what have you, then you can't just then waltz into UCLA or LSE the next year. It isn't like they're going to keep your seat for you if you go to another university. Then you all of a sudden, you become a transfer student, and then all bets are off and the situation's entirely different. So I just met a young girl who's helping at the tuition center. We're doing some stuff now. And she has decided about 3 months ago to not even apply this year. And she's taken sort of a self-imposed gap year and working. And that's not a bad idea if the timing works for you. but certainly things are going to be very interesting to how this reflects and how it hits international enrollment and whatnot. And of course, everyone's asking, will it make it easier or harder to get into schools? And that's something we'll kind of touch on and we'll speculate on at the very end. But there's no real way to say 100%. But I think one thing I will say here is that universities are still talking about opening. James, maybe you can say what you read about Rice University.
Rice University. I was just reading today that interesting. I mean, it's about a 50-50 split right now on sort of this hybrid versus this online. Harvard obviously is going. They've made that executive decision to go fully online. But Rice University is doing something very interesting where they've created these sort of outdoor additional spaces. They've created these 9 outdoor buildings where they're going to be conducting these learning spaces to keep the social distancing measures in place. So, I think it's brave and innovative on their part to, kind of take a statement against the online learning. But it's tough to say when you've got 4,000 universities in the U.S., right? Trying to come to some sort of consensus is let's go virtual. It's a lot easier when you're, a place like Canada or the UK, which it can basically, they're publicly funded institutions. Yeah. They've made the executive decision. We're going virtual.
I think that just in the last week, there's been more of awareness in the States about the COVID situation. We're not going to even get into that and Fauci and all that. But I think a lot of universities were maybe sort of side-eyeing what the universities right down the road was going to do. And then my impression is as UC has gone virtual as well, University of California, as the big name schools do, the rest tend to follow later on. So it wouldn't surprise me if other schools kind of go in the next 2 weeks, particularly in places like where Rice is in Texas and Houston, where COVID is definitely on the upsurge. If you're at some school in the middle of nowhere in Maine, it's a different story, but then the whole issue is how do you get there, particularly for international students. Just read an article in NPR about some kid was supposed to start at Claremont from Shanghai, and he kind of resigned to the fact he's not going to get there. So then it becomes a hard question of what do you do? Like if you're 2020, do you go? Well, obviously you can't go. Do you do virtual? Do you maybe sit back for a year? And we'll touch a little bit that later on. I think also one thing we won't even get into also is the recent changes with the ICE visa regulations with online learning. If you want to find out the latest on that, just open up CNN or BBC News to find out what the latest is. And one thing that we do know is that the consulates aren't ready to open to give visas yet. So even if you are accepted into a great school, you can't get an American visa. What about Canada, James?
Canada, yes, they did open. They opened. This is in Thailand specifically, but they did open. Students have their visas. The issue is around travel, though. Yeah. I mean, my students who were accepted to Canada, they've got the visa. They're ready to go. They've got a flight, but there's a lot of anxiety around. Okay, well, sure, you've got a flight for August 8th, maybe, and there's the potential of not being able to go, or when you get there, what do you're under a 14-day quarantine, so that's not an ideal situation, right, to be sort of stuck in. So all these sort of factors are leading to this myriad of reasons why there's this concern about travel and concern about attending universities in Canada or the US next year.
Yeah, and I think was one thing we haven't really touched on, but there have already been a few American universities that have basically thrown in the towel and said we just can't continue. This is the nail that broke the camel's back, so to speak, in that America is over-university. There are too many universities, and the number of American kids is going down and has been for the last 3 or 4 years. And there's a lot of small liberal arts colleges that are sprinkled all over America with 600 or 700 undergrads. And all of a sudden, they're losing members. There are people who do a community college instead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's just going to be a little bit of a culling, a little bit of a merging of American universities. I think Canada, they're fewer. Their state support is a little bit more rational, the way they're kind of laid out. UCLA, Georgetown, the big names, they're going nowhere. But the small little universities in, Grove City College in Pennsylvania, where my dad went, they're going to be hard pressed. And that trend is just starting. And I haven't seen much press about that recently. I think it's just because people are writing about other things.
Yeah. So I think they're barely hanging on, and they have to adapt too as well. They have to get all the social distancing measures in place. They've got to get all the structures. They've got to build all this new stuff to support the new regulations in reference to to social distancing. So they're not necessarily ready and
Yeah.
don't necessarily have the funds to do so. And international students are more focusing as always on the Ivy plus type of schools, or the larger, as a general, right? That seems to be the bigger draw for the majority of international students.
Yeah, and one thing we'll touch on, I think, but is, University of Illinois is going to go nowhere. But particularly in Australia, we see a lot of schools are just not shutting down by any means, but they're cutting programs. So you have to make sure that what you want to study is probably going to be there in 3 or 4 years, because the last thing you want to do is just rock up on campus and then your department is no longer there. So that's one thing to consider as well. Let's just move on to the next slide here. More on American Canada. So this is more about the rolling admissions and what's going to happen, I think, maybe towards the end of the year in terms of how they're going to handle admissions this coming cycle, James, as opposed to what we saw for the last time around.
So what's happened is, we anticipated, and the last sort of update that was given, we anticipated colleges to actually, come firm with earlier deadlines, like for schools like the November 1st early action ED schools to say, you know what, let's move it back a week. Let's change November 1st to, October 20th. But, what's really happened is that schools have said, no, we're going to give students more time to do a little more reflection. We recognize that due to the cancellation of the SATs in May and June, we're going to give more students more time to do their testing if they want to, right? And Jeremy's going to talk more about this too, in testing, and we'll talk about this later. But it's kind of the opposite. We really did expect that the universities would sort of bring the deadlines because students would have this extra time over summer or what have you. We did expect them to have earlier deadlines, but in fact, Georgia Tech just made an announcement. Georgia Tech is the earliest along with North Carolina Chapel Hill. It's that October 15th early action deadline, and they pushed it to November the 2nd for international students. So that's just a sign that give international students a little more time to work on their essays, to really articulate themselves, spend more time if they need to do testing, et cetera. So that was sort of the opposite of what we expected when we did the last update.
Yeah, because the last update I did a couple months ago, we were expecting the schools to move earlier to give the schools more time to assess the applications, to look at the essays, look at all the other supplemental things. I'm sure people are going to be sending in, the paintings they did when they were in 3rd grade, just have something else to send in. I think what might, just this idle speculation, James, might they move back their big days of announcing everything? So maybe the notification date, could that be punted back a couple weeks maybe? To give the school.
Yeah, so typically notification date would be December. If you're early action, early decision, that date is December 15th. It's possible that they could, maybe move it up a week or something like that, just before that sort of Christmas present. Congratulations, you made it to, to Princeton right before students go on their break. So that's a possibility that they might, based on there's been no announcements from any of the other ED or EA schools about pushing back the November 1st deadline. That one is still, there's been no announcement. I was surprised with Georgia Tech.
And Georgia Tech is normally at the lead they're kind of innovative with this sort of thing, and they're obviously so big and so influential in that sector. I think that also, again, what we're saying now could very well change in a couple months, so that this is purely, check with the school website. If you're not sure, get an email from the school, et cetera. But, I guess this would be apropos only for 2021 kids who are looking towards admissions, but it's broadly going to be on the same timing. Things just might be a week or two off one way or the other. In terms of testing, SAT, ACT requirements, the SAT in Thailand was available in March, right?
It was. That was the last.
It was available in Singapore we just got over the line with the kids in Singapore in March. But if you lived outside New York City, you couldn't take the SAT in March. Whereas I think if you live in Vermont, you're probably okay. So it was spotty in terms of who could take it. So it was basically canceled. So you have a whole generation of kids, maybe, between 1/3 and 60% have taken the test, and a lot of them haven't in the States. So as such, the College Board actually put up their hands and said, you know what? Colleges, we don't recommend you require this test because we haven't been able to deliver it. So we'll talk a little bit about this later. More about this. Sorry, top 4 hours. I'm a little out of it. But but most schools are just saying, listen, we're test optional. It's basically saying if you can do it, we wouldn't mind seeing it. But if you can't do it, don't worry about it. And we'll look at other things besides. Unfortunately, normally there's a lot of other things to look at, but the number of other things out there are constrained because there's no CCAs, there's no sports, there's none of that fun stuff. So our basic take is if you can take it, you might as well do it because it's not going to hurt you. And that's our basic, and that's what most schools would tell you. Some schools are going test blind, but even UCs, which is a whole different webinar, but UC is test blind, but only for California kids. And none of you live in California or are California residents. So the same thing goes. They're test optional for international, and they kind of not expect you to take it in the current situation, but if you can, you might as well. So tuition structure, maybe you can comment on this, James, just about how they're holding the line, right?
Yeah, they are, absolutely. Some students this probably came up at other international schools as well, where this is online learning. This isn't the same as in-class instruction. So is there going to be a reduction in the tuition for international students? And there really hasn't been that. It's, one of the things that they have sort of come back, a lot of universities have said, well, you're saving the money on accommodation. If you choose to join us in January, if we're an online institution, well, then that will save some money, but they're businesses, right? Universities, you have to think about that. They are businesses and they have to, accommodate such and they have to recoup revenues. So they haven't really changed a reduced tuition structure for online learning. Some of the fees they've obviously taken away would be the athletic fees, like if facilities are closed, such as the gyms or any of the activity fees at universities have sort of been taken off the bill. But in terms of actual cost of taking a class or enrolling for a credit, that hasn't changed at all. But there would be some of the student fees associated with athletics and other types of activities that would be taken off.
And James, just to pop in, it's important that people understand when you're looking at the fees of going to American University or the UK or Canada, what have you. Tuition in the kind of American sense or Canadian sense refers to what you pay to go to class, and then there's room and board on top of that. And room and board is someplace like NYU or Columbia in a big city might be another $20,000 or $30,000 a year, depending on what the situation may be. Whereas if you're at Boise State in Idaho, it's going to be appreciably less. But tuition is clearly the biggest expense. And the biggest expense a university faces, and I face this owning an education company, is teaching labor. And they have hundreds of professors who have to pay their mortgage. And I also know from experience that the teaching stuff on Zoom is no easier than the teaching in a classroom. And did I ever miss a classroom over the last couple months? I've been doing everything via Zoom. So the universities have to stay in business. You have to feel sympathetic towards them. And a lot of them just say, well, if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else because we have a waiting list. And if they're hopefully, a lot of universities are lucky enough to be able to say that. In terms of credit, just with AP and all that, we'll talk about this a little bit later in testing. Those policies pretty much are ongoing as was the case before. And that was widely expected. Canadian University on university recruitment. So maybe, James, you're the resident Canadian. What are Canadian?
That's right. What I anticipate with a lot of they have made the decision to go virtual. So that was sort of a unanimous. There's 94 universities, something like that, 94, 95 universities in Canada. So unanimously as a front, they decided to go virtually. But we anticipate just based on our numbers here at our school, we've seen a lot more students. Canada still ranks probably in the top. U.S. is still the preferred destination for international students here, but Canadian universities are becoming more increasingly popular with the UK and the Netherlands. But one of the things that I anticipate is Canada does have an excellent ability to when you attend university there's no restrictions really on your work permit. So one of the great benefits. I was talking to one of our alums from NIST a couple weeks ago, and he said, if I could have done it over again, I would have done this internship program at the University of Waterloo, which is like Canada's Silicon Valley, where you get linked with Google. And I really anticipate a lot of Canadian universities are really going to be trying to get more, really bump the recruitment game for international students, and with the the carrot of offering this sort of work experience internship once this becomes more plausible. But there's room for growth in Canada, and the reputation Canada is ranked. I think they've got UBC, U of T, and McGill University are all ranked in the what is it, the QS World Rankings in terms of overall, right, for universities. And
well, I think the Canada's up in their game. Also, that the optional practical training, the OPT in America, that's been under threat intensely just in the last couple months. And Canada's saying, well, look, we have it. It's good. It's almost like taking advantage of all the perceived missteps in America and saying, listen, we've got that sorted out. And it's a very desirable destination.
Yeah, it's cold, but
all the photos are going to be in May and June, right? They're not going to show you University of Alberta in February. Yeah. All right, we got more double depositing. This is probably not happening so much anymore because we're further along the process. This would be people who get into schools A and B and then are depositing, telling both schools are going to go there, and then not deciding which school they're going to go to until the last minute.
Yeah, this becomes a problem not only for the students, but for whoever your college advisor is as well. And I won't talk about any story. I won't mention any names or anything, but I've had some colleagues in the past that had to really build relationships up with universities when students were able to submit final transcripts to two universities, and they were both U.S. universities. These universities communicate with one another. They know which universities have been where students have made decisions sort of behind a counselor's back. But our ethical obligation as a counselor is to ensure that this practice does not take place. It's part of our ethical standards and guidelines, and we do not encourage students to do this. We want them to make the best choice, their one choice or singular choice decision by May the 1st, right? When they're faced with their decision as to what university they're going to go to. It does happen though, and this where students sort of surreptitiously will deposit to maybe one school in the U.S. or one in the U.K. where that's really hard for myself as a counselor to control because they don't necessarily ask for a final transcript or record. So, but just keep in mind that you can, as a student, right, you will lose your offer of admission at both of those schools if you were to practice this. So, anything else? I remember we were talking, Jeremy, about this before this.
Well, yeah, I think it's less of a concern now because we're further on in this process for the class of 2020. I know it was a big issue when I did this back in April. I think one thing with deferment that we initially thought that most competitive schools would say, okay, you want to defer for a year, that's fine. But I guess the recent intel that you've got, James, is saying that a lot of the schools saying, if you want to defer for a year, then sorry, we've got people on the wait list. We're more than happy to start.
Yeah, certainly you really had to have a good reason. Okay, if you were going to, and I get it with the pandemic, and that is, a very aggravating reason to not pursue university at a top tier institution, but you really had to articulate that clearly, and it was really up to the discretion of admissions whether they're going to grant you this deferment. But it is challenging because there's only, for a school like Stanford University or UPenn, you've only got 200 places, right, for international students. So the waiting list of students who are ready to pay the full tuition and do online learning was quite extensive. So a lot of universities, if the students didn't have valid reasons, they weren't simply just carte blanche handing out deferments. It really had to be there had to be a compelling reason. You had to, as a student, articulate that very clearly to the university.
And that'd be the top end university have big wait lists. What about your more say modestly ranked universities that use international students for revenue purposes?
Well, even those schools were coming back. I don't want to mention specific schools, but I did have, some situations where students fully expected, they just had to say, I want a deferment. It's automatic. And it wasn't. They really had to, even the sort of not the Ivy or Ivy Plus schools, but a lot of those, the very top universities that larger, public universities were still coming back and saying, look, that's not enough of a reason for us to grant you deferment. So there's a lot of pushback from universities on, and although universities have been very empathetic to the situation, at the end of the day, they still need numbers, and they still need students to attend, and they really wanted to firm up as quickly as possible who's actually coming, and it's a challenging.
I think one of the questions that came up in this is, I think a couple months ago when I did this, we were talking about maybe a lot of people will defer, and then they will take up the seats for the 2021, and then there'll be like a sine wave of harder to get in. But I guess what we're finding out now is that universities aren't letting that happen by saying, if you want to come, you got to come, unless you have a really good reason. And otherwise, there's 15 people that look just like you on paper. They're more than happy to pay and do it online.
Yeah, obviously the schools want the best or excellent students, but at the same token, they have to run facilities, and even if a student is to offer a deferment till the following year, it's contractual, but it's not necessarily 100%. I mean, there are ways.
I think also, wouldn't they have had to defer very early, right? They would have had to let the school know, April or so?
The final date, they would have had to reach out in April. I just read today that the final date for all the big universities was June. They had to let them know by the latest by June 5th.
And I think a lot of people who are trying to do it now are just that boat sailed. And I remember hearing a story interview with the director of admissions at Yale, not the current guy, a couple before him, but he said that if they took the kids they accepted one year and just threw all them in the bin and went for their second choice, none of the professors would have known the difference, because there's so little between the kids that get in and the kids that are almost there on the wait list. So it wouldn't there would be even hurting their name or reputation so much. Just having to go down that much.
Yeah, we really, I mean, with our students, we really, the ones that were accepted to the top tier institutions, we really encourage them to follow through with that commitment to the school, and to not, unless there was something that clearly there was a family circumstance or something that was preventing them from attending, we really asked them to toe the line with,
Well, yeah, I mean, 25 years ago, I deferred for a year, but I went to Taiwan and learned Chinese and but that's things like that aren't an option now. And sitting around for a year and playing Fortnite isn't really a good use of your time. All right, so let's go on to the next one here. We've gone to UK and Europe. All right, so I think you're just sort of at the conference, so you can speak to this a little bit.
Sure. So as we said, it's right now the situation is it's mostly online, and it's sort of a hybrid online. But this is changing sort of on a daily basis. And as we mentioned, Harvard University has just made a firm decision. Okay, we're going fully online. And in light of this whole, the edict, the visa that was issued, sort of the revocation of the visas for any international students who are going to online universities, that was sort of a way for, I think, the government to really get students into the classes and get things going the way they were traditionally going. I think it was more just a sort of a ploy for them to really for the government to make a statement that we really want classes to resume as normal and universities to flex on that. But there was a lot of pushback, obviously, that was obviously the situation for students now is that their visas are any student who's attending a university that is completely online, their visas are still valid. So that was, I think it was July 14th when that was sort of overturned. So, most schools are, it's on a daily, there's more and more schools that are saying we cannot support students coming back to class. There's a lot of measures that have to be, protective measures for students in terms of facilities. How do we host a lecture of 300 students? Okay, well,
you can't really in one room and then 6 different rooms with closed circuit TV, and might as well just have the kids sitting in dorms somewhere.
So most are sort of adopting this hybrid model where the social distancing it's got to be 6 feet separation. There'll be some smaller tutorial rooms, but it's just that a lot of the issue that universities just can't build or don't have the financial ability.
I think in Europe, it's the same challenges everywhere, obviously, but they're maybe a little bit ahead of the US in the process of dealing with COVID. But neither of us are epidemiologists, so it's hard to say what happens with a second wave and this and that. So it's sort of market by market, school by school. They're making the best decisions they can make with the information that they have.
Yeah, and the UK, for the most part, has made a sort of executive decision fully online.
Yeah.
Until January. That's sort of the hope there. This next point about deferment, it might be harder to get in. Deferment to 2020, point number 3. So what we found was that if students had the ability to ask for deferment in the UK specifically, the Netherlands really doesn't have that option. They're really I'm just addressing that one specifically because that's where most of our students, if they're going to Europe, that seems to be the prime destinations. But in terms of students asking for deferment, the Netherlands is you have to reapply. With your IB grades and everything, they weren't really offering deferment for students. The UK was, but for places like, once again, the same sort of situation occurs with the top tier schools like Oxford, Cambridge, et cetera. They're really going to, there's got to be a legitimate reason why you are asking for a deferment in spite of the classes going virtually. The next point here is for the highly selective, point number 4, students do, just in reference to the UK and what we saw with the IB scores, students might have missed. There's definitely an empathy that was there with the UK schools in regards to IB scores. So, many of our students, might have missed their conditional offers by 3 or 4 points, but a lot of universities in the UK sort of stepped up and said that's in light of the way that the IB, I think we're going to talk about this later, but in light of the way that the IB exams were moderated, they were able to offer them a place in spite of that. So a later start, I
think that's old news. I think that.
Yeah. And I think with the UK, they do have a later start anyway. They typically start at the end of September. So that makes sense there. And so that for the Netherlands as well, for some of the applied sciences universities, they're still taking applications at the moment. So there's still room for students to apply to the Netherlands. But just to rehash, the UK and Europe taking similar measures to the US in regards to international students. For the most part, it's going to be online or some sort of a hybrid model for the first part of the year. And it's that wait and see approach, right? Everybody's waiting for January to make any kind of executive, cohesive decisions.
Okay, then we go to the antipods. Again, Australian universities really took it in the chin because this all happened right at the start of the school year. So in North America, this happened kind of towards the middle of spring semester when the school year is 2/3 of the way through. Australia, they started in around then. Hey, Christine. So they're a little bit up against it on that front. So the universities switched to an online model, but now they were talking about getting back to normal classes. And then the second wave have recently hit Victoria. So I think I don't know if it's come from on high yet, but they're pretty much going to be an online model. Now, education is important in the UK for a number of reasons. Education is important in the US and Canada for economic reasons, among other things. Australia education is really a major pillar of the Australian economy. It's, revenue is predicted to go down 40%. It's depending on how you want to measure it, the 3rd or 4th biggest export earner of all of Australia, which is a decent sized economy. So state support is probably going to be essential just to keep these universities' doors open as we move forward from there. One thing to look out for when things open up again is whether or not universities in Australia still have the same programs. A lot of universities, they took that sweet, sweet foreign money and they expanded, and they had new programs, new faculties, this and that. And University of Tasmania, fine school, is going from 512 programs to 120. And that's just, one of, whatever 28 schools in Australia that are ratcheting back on what all is available in terms of what you can study when you get there. So it's going to be, I don't think any schools necessarily going to go out of business, although I did hear rumors about Macquarie. The big state universities are fine, but just make sure that the program you're looking at is still going to be there in 5 years, because you don't want to start on dentistry and then, you get there and then they drop the program. Then you can be up against it. So you just want to have that to be a consideration when you're looking at the schools there. James, did you hear anything about Australia recently?
So Australia, as you mentioned before, it's they have some of the premier universities like University of Melbourne and et cetera. So in terms of updates from the end of Australia is still on complete. I mean, it's so difficult to get into Australia at this point. They're on a complete lockdown mode. So I really, just being an island and just with the cases there's been some recent upsurges, I think, in Melbourne. So it's really challenging for international students to get back, I think, at this point. So it appears that it's going to be challenging for the students that started in January, right? As you mentioned, that was right when international students were arriving, and that's when the pandemic really was.
Yeah, there was talks of travel bubbles and quarantine facilities and stuff, and all that's kind of gone away in the last 2 or 3 weeks as the outbreak in Victoria has gotten much worse. So yeah, again, just sort of stay tuned. The Aussies, they want you to go there. It's a lovely place to just sort of see what happens. In terms of other destinations out there, some of the kids, I think we talked about this very early, in Hong Kong and Singapore, there's some great universities, some lovely options in Thailand, some great foreign system universities in Malaysia. Japan's upping their game a little bit on having foreign universities or English language programs. All kinds of stuff is out there for Asia, and a lot of students might be looking to stay. And why not? If it's going to last for 2 or 3 years, you might as well stay there. I would say Japan's a little bit behind other destinations in terms of containment, but international universities, Japan, like America, has too many universities, and to Taiwan, for historical reasons, has way too many universities. So they're going to be sort of looking to expand internationally, and of course they have to do that through English language programs mainly. A lot of these specific entrance exams have moved online, with the big exception of the Chinese Gaokao. It's still happening per normal. I think it's happening right now over the course of like 2 weeks. And they're, of course, taking very draconian steps to make sure that all is done relatively smoothly. And again, small beer for most students here looking to get to the capital W West, but there are some great options here, particularly schools, foreign outposts of universities in Asia, or just homegrown universities in Asia that are wonderful. Okay, so I'll just move on from here, talk a little bit about testing. Oh dear. Okay, SAT, ACT. I don't even know where to start here. Again, they keep changing the rules of the game every week. Basically, if you're class in 2021, you don't need to submit scores. If you can, great. If you can't, no biggie. Subject tests, done, gonzo. Okay, thank you. Caltech, Harvey Mudd, and MIT were the last schools to require them. I think Princeton might still have a stated requirement. Georgetown's always been a pain in the neck about subject tests. Subject tests are easy. If you need help with a subject test, you know what? You're not going to get into Caltech or MIT. So I think they finally realized that, and they got rid of that requirement. Same thing with the essay on the SAT. That's pretty much done, because University of California was the last school to really require the essay. And UC is going to be test blind for Californians and optional for others moving forward. Spring SAT test dates and June and April ACT test dates were canceled in America. So as such, they can't ask you to have that test, and that's perfectly fair. What the ACT now is doing is they're adding additional test dates in America, but the schools are coming out and saying, we can't have a test once a week. We don't have staff to do that. SAT is coming up on August 29th, knock, knock, knock. They've added a test date on September 26th, which is 1 week before the test date on October 3rd. You have a test 1 week apart, which is just a bit odd. But again, access to these tests internationally, it's not the same internationally. Even Thailand's hard to take the test now, according to James. In Singapore, if you want to know how to take the test, email me and tell me what school you go to, and I'll tell you the workarounds that I know. But right now, if you try to register for the SAT in Singapore, you're going to get no seats available until March of 2021. If you try to register in Jakarta, there are 7 test centers open in Jakarta for October. The thing is, the schools in Jakarta aren't open. So how's that going to work? So there's a lot of disconnect with what's on the ground and what the people in New York are doing. And again, international has always been a bit of an afterthought for these organizations. There was scuttlebutt and talk about both College Board doing an at-home SAT and ACT doing an at-home ACT. Those are both done. They're not going to happen immediately. That's the direction it's going to go. It's like cold fusion. In our lifetime, this will happen, maybe. College Board ran into some problems during their online AP testing, which worked okay, but it wasn't great. I think they realized if they tried to do that on a larger scale with SATs, it would have gone even more poorly. Everything's a work in progress. Do not trust your guidance counselor. Sorry, James. Don't trust blah, blah, blah. Even the College Board website has conflicting information. Basically, don't worry about it too much. You can't really control it yet. And just kind of wait and see as this develops moving forward. If you can't take the test, and this goes for the ISCE, this comes for the SSAT, this goes for the LSAT, GRE, GMAT, all the tests under the sun. If you can't take it without getting on a plane and risking your life and limb, the schools can't possibly require it. And that's okay. And the schools need you. So don't obsess about testing or hop on a plane or hop on a boat to get to Indonesia to take the test there. That's crazy talk. Okay, just worry about what you are in control of, which is your own academic journey and personal development. And I'm an SAT prep guy who makes a living off this silliness. So that's coming from me. Other guys, oh, you want to start prep now in 9th grade? No. Don't worry about it. Wait to see what happens and then address things from there. James, anything to add on that, Screed?
Yeah, I just think Jeremy's advice is germane here. It really, with testing, it is becoming, it's changing by the moment. It's not the colleges are looking for, they're looking for students who are going to be contributing to their school in a positive way, not somebody who can, the SAT or academics is one part of your application. It's how you can contribute to their community and how you can make the school better. And, an SAT grade is not the be all and end all. It's an academic credential, but it's only part of an application.
Yeah,
so.
I would say it's still important, but I think grades now are even more important than they used to be. Yeah. And that's one of the questions that came in. You can't put a percentage on it, but that's basically what's going down. Now, IB, IGCSE levels, yeah, James, you can speak to this better than I think.
So just in reference to the IB and I don't know if any of you students were involved. Possibly, we've got some of the class of 2020 here with us today, but there's a huge pushback from parents and students talking about the unfairness of how the IB did their algorithm and how they determined what the final scores would be. Essentially, what happened is, as many of you are aware, students submitted their internal assessments. They did all the stuff, all their major assignments up to January, which was really only 30% of their grade. So that was all, sent off to the IB. And based on those internal assessments, the other 70% was sort of determined by this algorithm that the IB had as predicting how the students would have done on their final, IB exams. But I think one of the positives, in terms of test scores around the world, there was a significant drop, I think, from schools in terms of the numbers and the figures. So there was an unfairness issue around how the IB determined it. There's a lot of students who are asking for their IB grades to be, for their tests to be, for their internal assessments to be regraded. At the moment, there's also many students have requested November retakes of the examination so they can, bump their scores up. But one of the things colleges and universities, though, have been, I think the best way to put it is they have been empathetic to this and really, as I mentioned before, the UK, in terms of my students, they were really quite, very lenient in terms of allowing them, if they didn't make their, conditional offers, they did give them the benefit of the 3 points. And U.S. universities, all offers are conditional, but in the U.S. specifically, not most of the offers are not tied to these IB.
Yeah, I think in the UK in particular, the individual faculty need to have this score in this class, and they've tended to be pretty firm on that. But it's good this last cycle, they were a little bit more accommodating because they had to be. And again, this gets into the bigger debate of how do we accurately test our kids? And if only there's a multiple choice test like the SAT they can take instead. But again, it's apples and oranges, and an SAT is not the same as an IB diploma, certainly, or an IGCSE or A level. So it's a very philosophical debate that people will be having until we're gone about, how to assess kids getting into universities. Just moving along, we got AP testing. I can talk to this. I'm a little bit involved in this stuff. It was basically administered at home. You could take the test, but of course, you take your AP physics at 3 p.m. in New York City. Well, you know what? If you lived in Tokyo, that would have been, 4 a.m. your time. Sorry. So they took them all at the same time. It was synchronous rather than asynchronous, to use the parlance. Chester treated the same way. The kids got their scores back the last couple of weeks. Most of the kids I talked to were like, yeah, I got what I expected. I think they kind of knew what the kids were getting into. But they've come out and said that we don't want to do this again. Okay, basically College Board said, we want to go back to the old system because I think they kind of snuck through this one with a hard pass. But they want to get back to the old paper and pencil format next year. Again, in 20 years, this will be on a computer or iPad or hologram, who knows. But they want to get back to the old way. That's what they know what they're doing. AP testing, in particular for College Board, is a huge source of revenue for them. And they really want to milk that as much as possible. And internationally, it's always been College Board versus AP. College Board AP versus IB. And of course, increasingly, IB has been winning that battle of late. College Board is trying to push AP testing in particular in China. But that's a whole other discussion. I wrote an article about that a couple years ago. Anyway, it's early indication, paper-based next year. Now, year by year, I think we've talked a lot about 2020. You should know what you're doing by now. If you don't, you kind of got some bad advice about having to wait too long. So if you're committed to a school, you kind of got to go there, or you got to tell them, listen, I'm just going to withdraw, and maybe next year I'll apply again. You're sort of up against it. I think to find out more about any of these schools, some great advice James gave me when we were coming up this afternoon, is there'll be one person at that school who's in charge of Thailand, Southeast Asia, China, Japan. Normally actually more junior people are the international types who can travel more. And they're going to be kind of looking out for you. And if that person is the one that advocated in your behalf and really wants you to go, that they're probably like KPI'd or bonused on how many students that they accept actually end up coming. And they're there to help you and be your advocate and give you the straight dope about what's going on. So hopefully you should know who that person is and have their email address, and they should hopefully be sitting there 6 hours a day responding to emails. For 2021, this is a stickier wicket where, again, we've alluded to it lots of times. We don't really know for sure what's the state of, will the SATs be here in 6 months? I hope so. I'll be doing something else. It's impossible to say for sure, but based on our foreknowledge, if you take the test, great. Work hard in school. Try to do as many activities that you can do without getting sick or getting COVID-y. Do all the other activities that you love to do that within allowance of social distancing. I like to tell the kids, if you're close enough to punch someone, you're too close. So you should punch them. And find something useful and creative to do to help your application. And people like James have been saying this for years. Find a passion, pursue it. Don't do 16 different groups. Don't worry about taking 4 more AP tests. Find something that you're good at, that you excel at. If you're really into piccolo, get fully into piccolo. If you're really into viola, do hardcore viola. Things like that. Sports such that you can do those, and try not to concern yourself too much on things that are outside of your control. That's just my broad advice. James, anything to add on that?
Yeah. There's just so many great. It can be overwhelming. I know for you as students, right? The amount of options out there. What do I do? And what's the best? And I hate to mention particular companies, but some ones that I sort of put students. One of the ones that that time and time again that offers free online courses is Coursera, and they've got just so many. It's free. You can join. I think it's $75 for a 3-month membership, and you've got unlimited access. But there's these are classes that are taught by top tier institutions on whatever subject you're interested in. Whether you want to you're curious about engineering or you maybe want to start, learning a bit more about literature, a particular author. There's everything's, it's voluminous in terms of that. There's so many great, MOOCs out there, like in terms of courses. Another one of my students, there's also virtual internships. One that I want to, one of my students did this summer. It's called Invest In. And one of my students it was more of a careers thing that she said, I don't know if I want to do, if I want to be an engineer or if I wanted to, I want to study computer science. So what she did this summer is she was able to do a combination of those two things. She did 3 days of learning how to be an engineer and, being shadowed by somebody in the job. There are ways to do that. So I just encourage you to look at that list, that Google Doc of great activities, but 2, I can definitely endorse and I would say that my students really enjoyed, and I've got feedback. Coursera and Invest In are excellent.
Yeah, and just this is more of a broader statement, but I taught a class yesterday where I had a bunch of kids who took AP US History last year, and several of them couldn't give me any kind of rough dates of when the American Civil War was. So I think too often in school, people learn stuff and they vomit it back out in May, when they take the final exam. And then it's like almost they're purging their hard drive for something else. So the point with Coursera is to do things that actually interest you, that you'll retain that knowledge later on and become a more complete individual, not just to say, oh, look, I did 15 courses on Coursera, or look, I'm going to do additional AP testing. That doesn't impress schools. That's just testing. They're looking for intellectual curiosity and room for growth. Now, everything we just said for 2021 also applies to 2022. One bit of advice that I am giving is, again, for SAT-wise, you've got August, September, October, December. I'd say December is the earliest the kids should really take it. Most kids don't have the math chops to take it before then. I know some people running into like final exams are conflicting with that December test date. It's all case by case. I would just say August, not too soon. You want to get off to a really strong start on your junior year and not let SAT prep and taking the actual test and all that get in the way. Particularly those who are doing the IB. IB is the real deal. Everything up till now is just like the drum roll. Spring training's over, you're right on to the All-Star game. IB is hard. And you want to like make sure that your first month or two within the IB that you're fully focused and have time and not distracted by SAT prep, which you can put off till later with no penalty to yourself. Again, if you're looking for stuff to do this summer, Coursera, if you're taking psychology in school, do Intro to Psych on Coursera. You have that knocked out, right? We all know what you're going to be doing in math the first couple months. Go on Khan Academy, sequences and series. It's what they do in IB math at the beginning. You're doing AP US History, do US History, watch some Ken Burns documentaries. Whatever you want to do just to kind of keep mentally engaged. I'm teaching a lot of kids right now that have been out of school for 3 or 4 months, and they're having issues with basic algebra. It's like they forgot how to swim or something, and they're having to learn it all over again. So just kind of, do some like reps on basic math and basic reading skills and this and that, just to get ready. Because otherwise, school's going to sneak up on you, and you're going to be like, when you start school. I see this with the Singaporean boys who are doing national service for 2 years in the Army, right, running around drinking Milo, playing cards, and then they rock up at Berkeley and they're an intro to philosophy, and they're a little bit hard pressed. It's a bit of a learning process for them to get up to speed. We're seeing that every year with kids that regress over the summer, but now the summer all of a sudden is turning into 6 months. So getting back up to speed academically is going to be the trick. For younger kids, don't worry. Find something that interests you. Learn a language, play an instrument, play sports, whatever. Just do something with your life other than Fortnite or playing, what's that, all the stuff they do online nowadays, TikTok and all that. Just find something that interests you and pursue that passion. If you want to know, what's a good idea, then, you should know yourself, okay, just to be overly blunt. And don't let your parents force into something you really don't like. But that's a whole other discussion of what to do with a 9th grader to get them into a top school, and that's just, I don't even want to go there. James, any other final things for the younger kids?
Well, I think for you, Jeremy, I 100% agree with you. I think it's just do think what I see with students who are, in the younger grades is they're often engaged. There's a curiosity. Be curious, right? I think that's the word. Learn about, you can. There's still, I do have some students who in 9th grade are doing Coursera and stuff like that, but, make some videos with some friends, do something, maybe find ways that you can, either with older students or with teachers to do video productions. That's been helpful. Find ways that you can help out at your school. Maybe start a club. Maybe you notice at your school there that you're really interested in something like robotics and there's no program. Talk to the teacher and see, hey, Mr. Blake, do you mind? Is there any way that you could help me to start this robotics club? Be an initiator, I think. But something you're genuinely interested in.
Right?
Yeah. So I just think it's but yeah, the curiosity, right? Be curious.
And actually, well, just one thing in the short term, I've been telling all the kids I interact with is, get yourself like a moleskin, like a little book. You can't see this, right? It's one of these little book things, and keep a journal for 2 weeks, writing about your thoughts about what you're going through, your hopes, aspirations, fears, and dreams. And I guarantee in 1, 2, 5, 10 years time, that's going to be very interesting reading for you. Keeping journals is not a bad idea anyway, but as we go through this crazy time, it'll help you reflect on that and potentially write a college essay about that later on. But we're not going to get into how to write college essays. That's a different series of webinars, I think. Okay, now just shameless promotion. We do SAT prep. Right now, I'm not doing anything for the ACT. I'm worried it's going to get basically canceled. We're available for tutoring for the SAT, ISE. SAT is what you need to get into American high schools. They haven't even said how they're going to administer it internationally come August, so we're just not accepting any business for that. I'm not going to prepare a kid for a test that they can't take. We've been here doing this since 2001. All teachers, American grads. We're only doing it for rising juniors and seniors now. If you're rising sophomore, we have some other programs we're going to be rolling out. We did it earlier this summer. We're doing it again later on. Kind of like not remedial, but basic grammar skills and reading skills we're going to do as well. We're hitting all the test dates. Right now, we're renting classrooms on Holland Road. For those of you outside Singapore, we have an online-only program that's only available if you email me and ask me for more information and let me know where your kid goes to school. We're keeping it kind of regional. And that's what we do. So now we got, just to rehash, like I talked about at the beginning, crossover pricing for stunts. Universities need you, okay? They need your business. They need your parents' money. So don't worry too much about what you can't change. Worry about what you can change. And you can ultimately change yourself a little bit. Work on yourself for now. If you need someone to calm you down, you have to talk to your school university counselor once school starts up again. They're going to be hopefully scheduling meetings with everybody. Some of you might be meeting your counselor for the first time in August, and it's been a little bit of a churn in the counselor world this past summer. There's a lot of wild, inaccurate news out there, and if it seems weird, then maybe it's not right. I mean, there's too much information now, so talk to a trusted source to try to verify things. Okay, any closing words, James, before we go on to the questions?
Yeah, I think this has been a time of reflection for everyone, right? And the who am I kind of question, and what do I like to do? I could speak for myself, and I think for you as well. It's probably once you get rid of all the veneers and the layers of everything, you've started to ask a lot of questions. It's been a reflective time, and I think that's what universities really want. They want people who know themselves and can articulate that and are interested in who they are and pursue those types of passions. But I think the best advice is you are who you are. You're not trying to become somebody else, and you just do the things that you enjoy. And take a step back from all this and do things that make you happy. What are the things that really, that you enjoy and you can focus on that can motivate you during this time. So those are some things just to relax, be yourself, and do things that you enjoy. So you're motivated to do them.
Okay, great. Yeah, I fully agree with all that. And again, this is sort of timeless advice that people have been saying for many years. But James and my task is also often Sisyphean, that every year it just kind of starts anew and the process becomes again, and it's very cyclical in that manner. Now, James, I think we answered a good chunk of the questions as we went. Are there any just one or two that just pop out that you think that we are worthy of address?
Yeah, so I've got the questions here, Jeremy. So somebody asked, are colleges considering to have additional seats for undergraduates entering 2021, considering deferrals of the several 2020 batch students. And I think we answered this in a sort of nebulous way in the presentation, in that there, I don't want to, give a guess on this, but colleges have really sort of been firm as to who can ask for a deferral, and I think one of the things is they really, I don't anticipate they're going to open any extra seats for places.
They can't just all of a sudden build new first-year dorms. I mean, it's happened where they've accepted too many and they got their yield wrong. And then, like, I know my little brother ended up in a hotel in New York for 2 months because NYU screwed up their yield percentage. So they can't just scale up and down like that. They can't just bring in containers and have the kids live there. So I don't think that's
answer that question. I don't anticipate that. I don't anticipate any additional spots opening up for international students at the top tier schools. There's another question on here for an NS student looking for a 2-year deferment.
Yeah, I think it was the old chestnut is NS National Services Singapore. It's 2 years for the boys. The basic story is maybe. It depends. Yeah, it really depends on the school. I can talk about this for hours. All the schools have their own individual policy on this. And I think probably for a 2-year deferment, they might be more amenable because obviously that's a good reason because you don't have any other excuse. But you might just want to just sit in your hands and sit back for a couple of years and see what happens and not tie yourself to an individual school. Because maybe it might be easier to get in 2 years from now. So depending on the situation, where you are in the application and what you've confirmed.
Okay, and I had another question about that, the deferrals. So that's second person asking about that. A good question, do colleges see your senior year statistics?
I think that's senior year grades, I'd imagine. So that would be a big fat yes.
Yeah, and they do track that data too. So we know that colleges have, they'll have IB scores of students from certain schools. So they'll track those students through, the college years. So they do keep track of that. Are there any expected changes to the application process for U.S. universities? They've added, as you're aware, students should be aware that for the common application, they have added an additional section on how has the COVID crisis impacted you. It's an optional, but obviously I think it would be one that I would answer as a student.
Yeah, and again, like I raised earlier with keeping a journal, having something like that to reflect upon, because if everyone's writing the same essay, they're going to get very boring very quickly. So having a new hot take on that would be something very useful.
Yeah, any extra information that you can give, anything that they can know something more about you and your personal, they want to know this stuff. How to build a portfolio for a successful application. My suggestion for that is always to start with a resume. Hopefully your guidance counselor has worked with you since grade 9 on this, building as you go through. That's sort of a shell for you to work from to have categories of accomplishments that you've done over the years. In terms of a portfolio, a lot of universities now are looking at links you might want to start like an e-portfolio with a website like Wix, where you can have videos or any kind of extra information such as that. How do you build a successful portfolio? Well, you have to put a lot of time into your part of a portfolio. A big part of it for the US and the UK is the essay component. So on average, they say to do a 600-word essay for the common application, it takes about 18 hours of refinements. So don't underestimate how much time this is going out to the rising juniors and seniors this year to really spend this summer, working on drafts of your essays, to rework them, get advice from your college counselor or friends on this. Anything else that?
I think we've all the basics.
We've answered. Yeah, I think we've answered both of them.
A lot of these questions are we just don't know yet, and wait for the school to start again. Your guidance counselors are doing research like we do research, and ask around. But don't trust what people are saying on Quora or Reddit or something like that. Trust real sources. Trust the actual schools or the journals that we read, Chronicle Higher Ed, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to be the real source of information. There's a lot of just junk out there. So you have to be a little bit discriminating in terms of how we get that information. So any other questions on that sort of stuff, you can email me, and if I don't know, I'll ask people who do know. But let's now go to the final bit of this little presentation. We talked to Christine, who's been waiting very patiently in New York for us to talk about a little bit about her. Now, Christine and I have known each other for a long time, but I don't really know her background very well. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of Christine's journey in education and also what she did importantly after education. I think too often, particularly out here, people see university as a destination rather than just a waypoint along the way. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Christine, this is like the Leonard, like the actor's studio where they ask the silly questions. I'm just going to go through this quickly. Okay, please describe your childhood. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in San Diego, California, and I think fostering creativity probably defined my childhood.
Okay.
So always exploring and traveling and trying new things.
Okay, and what did like the adults in your life do for a living? Were there any inspirations about what you want to do with yourself based on what the people around you were doing?
No, I mean, my parents had very traditional jobs. My mom's a teacher, and my dad was in finance and real estate. So those are great careers, but it wasn't what any of my siblings and I decided to do.
Okay, which is quite common. Oftentimes, someone like me, most of my parents are teachers. I ended up in education. But, oftentimes you tend to zig when everyone else tends to zag. So in terms of what school do you attend for pre-university? Were you in just a private school, public school in San Diego, or how?
I did a combination of private and public. So elementary and middle school, private. And then I went to a public high school.
And I imagine it would have been like in a nice neighborhood. So it was like a decent public school?
Yeah, I mean, it was large. So there was that factor. I'd gone from very small, like private schools to needing to stand out in a large school, but there were
how many were in your graduating class in high school?
800.
Wow, that's huge, because I mean the biggest international schools might be 250, 300. So a class of 800 is it's massive. And so they did the more traditional American style AP tests, all the way through. Okay.
Yep.
And then what was your favorite subject in high school, if you can think back that far?
No, probably English and history.
English and history, right? Okay.
I've always skewed more on the liberal arts, so.
Okay, I did too. Okay, the least useful of the arts. And then when you're looking at universities, I know where you went, obviously, but how big was your spectrum in terms of your applications?
I actually only applied to 6 schools.
That's normal back then. Now, actually, nowadays, some schools, international schools, say only 8 is the max because it's paperwork to do. But say 6, would that include the UCs as one or many UCs?
I did UCLA because my parents went there and they wanted, that box checked. At the time, the UC system was you could apply to many in one application. So I just did UCLA and UC Berkeley.
It's become a bit more complicated, but yes, they make it relatively easy.
Yeah.
So UCLA, Berkeley, and then anything out of state, or?
And that was it. I also applied to Stanford, Boston University, and then a liberal arts school in the Midwest.
Okay, yeah, and it's common. I mean, some people in America will only apply within their region. I certainly did. I think my brother did as well. I know other people would take a little more expansive view about where they want to go. Yeah, I guess it sort of depends on where you're coming from and how far away from your parents you want to be. And then, what were your career dreams when you headed off to university? And you went to Berkeley, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
although I will say I did have the debate between going to Stanford and Cal, so that was I had to choose between 2 rivals, but Berkeley spoke to me more than Stanford. So.
Well, it's also, if you're an in-state resident of California, it's also a financial decision as well, right?
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, very true. I of course, I had the option between University of Massachusetts, free ride, and Columbia in New York, and I paid for Columbia until I was about 35. So it's always a bit of a waiting game. And so when you showed up at Berkeley, what was do you have any ambition at the time what you wanted to be, upon graduation, what you wanted to do right after school?
Yeah, I wanted to focus on journalism, broadcast journalism specifically.
Okay,
so.
and that normally would be called communications, right?
Yes, I was a double major in communications and political science.
Okay.
At Cal.
Okay, okay. And communication is again, my West Coast knowledge isn't that great, but Cal's strong in communications?
They have a strong grad journalism school, so I was kind of geared toward that.
Right, right. I know communications is sort of a niche major as an undergraduate level, and certain schools like Emerson do it really well in Boston, and Syracuse did it really well, even though it's middle of nowhere in upstate. But it's more of like so if the school is a strong J school, then that would carry through to communications.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So were you like on the school newspaper and all that fun stuff?
I wasn't. I actually went more the political route. So I was in.
Well, it's
Yeah.
Berkeley, right? You have to protest something.
I know. I was in the student body, and I was in a sorority, so I was on the governing body of the Greek system.
And that's okay. And then what is what you studied at university, was that compelling to you? Was it interesting to you? Or do you see it more as a means to an end?
No, I loved it. And I actually could have graduated earlier, but I wanted to make the most of my 4 years. So I ended up at the last end of it studying film and just taking a bunch of film classes,
I'm so
which
jealous.
is actually what pivoted me to.
Okay. So it was sort of a, what the heck, I've always been interested in Ingrid Bergman, and then you ended up, we'll find out that in just a minute. And then, so how did your aspirations change during your university days? Did they just become more, specific or vague, or how?
It became more specific what I didn't want to do. I actually realized I wasn't that interested in broadcast journalism because I learned more about it. I was doing internships in San Francisco at the same time. And once you're in the system and you realize the process that you have to take to get a coveted major city network, you have to go through a lot of smaller towns in the US that aren't as desirable.
The whole Anchorman thing.
Yes. Yes.
Broadcast journalism is a really tough racket. No matter what you're doing, it's tricky to get in. And oftentimes, again, we're learning now is you have to say things that aren't necessarily accurate. And did you work during university? Did you have like work study jobs and stuff like that?
At the library, yep. I was working in the government library.
So you're stacking books?
I was. I realized I really love library sciences actually, but I just decided not to pursue that.
Yeah, that's a tricky major. With that one, you actually have to go all the way to master's to really be taken seriously, and then it's you end up as a librarian. All right, I won't tell you about my library jokes at Columbia. That's a story for offline, I think. So what was the most important non-academic thing you learned in university? Here we go. I wrote these a while ago.
I would say it kind of dovetails with what you said earlier about being curious. And if you're able to, I had the luxury of being able to spend 4 years focused on it so that once I was taking major focus classes, I could also take classes that were interesting to me. So I kept stoking that just curiosity. And I love learning. So I think it was just this like always be learning kind of philosophy, not toward a necessarily immediate end.
Exactly. I think a great school like Cal or Columbia, wherever, any good school would inculcate the joy of learning that you would continue to learn later on. And people would appreciate graduates from those places, not that they've learned what they're going to be doing in that particular job, that they can pick stuff up on the fly and be able to continue that process. I know that, my university gets recruited heavily by finance people. And half the people end up in finance are like physics majors or something. And they're just like really good at math and are good at Excel. And that's really what they're looking for. The actual theory behind it, they figure you can learn that as you go. It's learning, particularly at the undergraduate level, I think in America, it's learning how to learn. And then if you really want to do something in any kind of depth, you really have to go to a master's program to do that, which again, depending on what you want to do, isn't necessarily even necessary or useful for that matter. Okay, what's next here? Okay, what was your favorite classes or subjects in university? Which ones did you find most compelling?
I actually loved my Middle East politics class. I found that very fascinating. And then, it was German film, the history of German film.
History of German, okay, yeah. Area that I know a little bit about movies. German film, a little Run Lola Run or something. Okay, but yeah, the old stuff I have no idea. And so your degree scroll is still wet. You marched, and did you have a job on graduation, or did you have to? What was your initial process at that stage?
I did. Well, I'd already at the end decided I wanted to leave the Bay Area. I moved to LA and I had a job lined up working for the American Society of Cinematographers. Okay. So at that point, I decided I wanted to pursue film more than TV news.
Is that like an NGO that kind of like is like a sort of like a trade group then, or almost like a
It
union?
is a trade group. I mean, it's a club really. So it was becoming familiar with all the cinematographers, but basically running their clubhouse, which
Okay.
is their like,
And
yeah,
would any proper movie have to hire someone with the right card? Otherwise, they lose their union privileges, that sort of thing?
exactly. When you see on film credits ASC, that's who they are. And almost all the top cinematographers are part of that group.
So
Yeah,
it's like SAG for cinematographers.
exactly.
Okay,
But I
gotcha.
wasn't there very long because then I ended up getting a job with Ridley Scott,
Oh,
which was really
okay.
what
And
set me on.
just for those of us who don't know who Ridley Scott is, what is Ridley Scott famous for?
Blade Runner, but he's done a bunch of very notable Academy Award winning films like The Gladiator. So
So
he also,
I mean, big A-list director. And what were you doing for Mr. Scott? Sir Scott, probably, I think, right?
that's right, he is knighted. I was working in his office first as like a coordinator for the general office, and then I became more specific as an assistant producer for the commercials that he also directs when he's not directing film.
Oh, okay. And imagine if you get Ridley Scott to do your commercial, it's going to look very nice, and Mr. Sir Scott's going to get a nice check at the end of that.
That's true. He started his commercial directing career with that very infamous Apple
Oh, he did the
commercial.
Apple one with a.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. There you go. And he's I don't know if he has kids, but he's got to pay for college. You know, you got to make ends meet, right? What's the man got to do? Then, how long were you working with Mr. Scott?
For 6 years.
6 years, really? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then how did you segue from that to your next gig? Was it just, were you poached? Were you look for it?
I was poached. I mean, the great thing about Ridley's company is that many amazing people come through. I met Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, they were always coming in for meetings. But then I met a director who was working with the Black Eyed Peas at the time. So I ended up getting this opportunity. My other word of advice is always say yes, even if you don't exactly know what you're doing, because you'll be able to figure it out and launch yourself forward. So I was asked to write a music video for Fergie of the Black Eyed Peas. So I wrote the concept for Fergalicious, which then ended up winning a bunch of awards and MTV, VMAs. And then from there, I was asked to join the Black Eyed Peas World Tour as a creative director.
Wow. Okay. And this was roughly when? I wouldn't want to date you too much, but
2006, 2007.
Okay. The Black, listen, Will.i.am, he comes out to Singapore used to come out to Singapore every 2 or 3 years. I know that they've toured out this way a fair amount. For American band, they certainly, and they're one of those bands that tours more than others, right?
Yeah, at the time, I mean, it was a full world tour.
Wow.
So
Okay.
basically I went from living in LA to living in Las Vegas, where we were running the show in the Mandalay Bay.
Oh dear.
They gave us the empty arena. So we basically were putting the show together there.
So it was a residency there, or are you just getting it together there and then you took it on the road once it was sorted?
Exactly. Yeah, the latter.
And then was it just like hotels for 18 months then?
It was a lot of traveling. I didn't have to travel to all the locations, but a lot of them. And I did come out here to New York quite often with them because they also did special events like Fashion Rocks at the time, which was a big musician showcase, hip hop honors.
Or someone's really expensive wedding out in Long Island.
I was never part of that. I was always like the official events, but yeah.
I think I traveled a lot when I was, in the start of my career, and it certainly is fun. But I think a lot of the parents listening might not miss traveling so much now. That it wears on you after a while. I miss it now, obviously, but the whole travel 2 or 3 weeks a month, as many of the kids do, the parents do in Singapore, I think probably they aren't missing that. And then since the Black Eyed Peas, and then that was a while ago. And then what's your current gig then?
Well, that set me up to write music videos for other top musicians. So I've done music videos for Beyonce, Jay-Z, Fergie, Rihanna, Britney Spears, Katy Perry, and they continue to win a lot of awards. So I have a couple Moon Men, one on the shelf, but that just set me off into working with directors as a freelance consultant. So now I have my own company where I consult with directors about what will make them marketable as they're pitching their scripts, whether it be TV, film, short films, music videos. So basically I help them get their ideas in line and work with the creative concept to make it compelling for the financiers to sign on.
So, I mean, directors obviously are very, very artistic souls. Is it sort of getting their vision in their head to something that is doable and something that was sort of something that other people could understand, right?
Exactly. I mean, because I did do a lot of producing, I do have some knowledge of budgets, but when we first start working together, whichever director it's with, I try not to constrain the creativity. It's only later that I say, well, you can't afford 5 helicopters. You have to scale it down to 1.
Oh,
But
just
yes.
we'll pick that up in post. We'll pick that up in post, right?
Exactly.
So and then what lessons from your academic life helped you with your present gig? Anything other than German film?
Yeah, well, no, it's just this like curiosity for the world and constantly being interested in what's current and what's happening. Now, like later in life, I ended up pairing musicians like Drake and Kanye with contemporary artists in their music videos. So Drake did a music video with James Terrell. Kanye has worked with many Japanese animators. Like making those connections, being the eyes and ears of what's interesting and about to be current and cool is what I end up offering to directors who are either too busy, or for some of them who've been in the business a long time, they're not as tuned in to what's happening.
They're in their little creative bubble.
Exactly.
Echo chamber. They need someone from outside to move them along the right direction.
Yeah.
Okay, last one here. Okay, what do you need to learn along the way that wasn't covered in school?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think it's just about being flexible, being adaptable, being able to connect the dots for people. You know, if they look at your resume or your background or your major and they don't see how that factors into what you want to do in the next step, it's about making that leap for people and realizing that in my case, a lot of it boiled down to being a storyteller. So I went from aspiring to wanting to tell stories via TV news to then telling stories through film, music videos, commercials, and that all of that is about organizing your interests into a story that's compelling and interesting for people, and they know where you'll fit in with what they need.
Oh, brilliant. And that's some of the lesson that can just go to everyone and everything. To just be flexible and to don't be so hidebound on procedures and the way. Worry about the end rather than the means. Certainly out here in Asia, people tend to be a little bit more, particularly in Singapore. You have to do a standard operating procedure to get something done, but ultimately it's about what's the end result rather than the actual process. Now, in your industry, I think more than others, academic credentials don't matter much at all, right? It's more your show reel and what you've done, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about going back to grad school just for an interest in art history or contemporary art through Sotheby's, but that would just be something that's for me and not anything that.
And then if you, I don't know if you make many hiring decisions about, someone working on a work, when you get their resume, is it just like education sort of on page 3 and it's not really something that important, or something that was more at the forefront in your industry?
Well, there are definitely notable film and design schools, particularly in the United States, that are eye-catching. Yeah. So that's helpful. But besides that, I mean, I've known people at ad agencies who've hired employees based on their music, their Spotify music curation. So it's like, if you show yourself to be a very creative avant-garde person in whatever way that's interesting to you, it can still open doors for you.
Yeah, and other industries, I have friends in finance, and they wouldn't consider hiring anyone who didn't go to one of 10 universities in the world, irrespective of their experience. So I think the divorce of academic credentials versus what you're actually going to do, it varies greatly industry by industry. And I'm talking to creative individuals like you, that it's not so much of a big deal. But obviously, if you want to do, petroleum engineering, you kind of have to do petroleum engineering at the undergraduate level, and there's only X number of schools that do it. So you're sort of stuck on that path. But if you want to do something on the more creative front, it really doesn't matter so much where you go or how you do it, as long as you do it well.
Yeah, I think it's like you were speaking earlier, I still take classes on Coursera, and it's still a way of just stoking that information for myself. That is a skill that still comes into play in terms of the work and staying activated and engaged.
Yep. And again, you especially in Chinese, live till long and learn till long. Learn till long life. It doesn't come across in translation very well. But basically, just keep learning and you're going to be okay in the end. And I look, I look up a word every day I don't know, and maybe the fifth time I might remember it, but again, you just want to feel like at least we're moving in the right direction with expanding your knowledge. And hopefully we all will embrace that a little bit more moving forward. Okay, Christine, I can't thank you enough for joining us in the morning your time. It's like a sunny morning in New York, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I guess I'll end with saying it's a cliche, but what James was saying earlier about being an individual, I think that's definitely something worth pursuing, and it will get you far if you stay true to that.
Yeah, and without talking too much about how to get into XYZ universities, being spiky, being your own individual, being embracing your differences is key, because on paper so many kids look pretty much the same. They all do Model UN in Singapore. All the kids do Chinese orchestra and chess club. And I know you talked about earlier, James, robotics club. Every third kid does robotics now. So doing something a little bit weird is going to be a good thing. But then on the flip side, I know of kids whose parents had them start to play harp when they're 7 because they figured that Stanford would need a harpist. So, but you want to find something that you do and you enjoy doing, and then ride that as far as it will take you. And if you don't get into the school of your dreams, you know what? It probably wasn't your school anyway. And you're going to do just fine no matter where you end up. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Our guest from Bangkok, James, we kept you in the office far too long. Christina, I hope you have a lovely day in New York. I'm going to have a nice little frozen pizza here. And any other questions about anything, guys, you can just email us. This has been recorded for all the friends out there. It's going to go up on YouTube in the next couple days. Be on my Jeremy Craig channel, and also put it on the Testtakers website. So it'll be viewable there. And I'll timestamp it so you can skip around to the more interesting stuff. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.